Blessings and salutations. So good to be with you all once again for episode 3 of Sound Mind. I'm licensed therapist, your host for season 5 and 6 and 7 and whatever else the Lord will have us to do in this project together. I hope all is well, that you've been blessed. If you're tuning in today, that means that you have been seen versus viewed. So we want to thank God for that. And we want to just jump in today because we have some great conversations and mental health dynamics that we're going to address today. But as always want to give God the praise and the glory for the opportunity to be together and to serve in this capacity. So we want God to bless this episode, and hopefully it'll be a blessing to you. I'm extremely excited to share today on today's subject matter. But before we get started with today's subject matter, we want to make sure that we're doing our homework. So on last week in episode 2, we talked about moving past irrationality, or the rationalities of irrationalities, where we talked about the difference between distrust, paranoia, suspicions, and how do you navigate through those by utilizing discernment. So please make sure that you did your homework, because here at Sound Mind and on Hope TV, we're not just here for conversation, we're here for conversion. But another part that's important about conversion is conviction. If you feel convicted, I always tell my population that I work with in therapy, conviction is an indication that there is something either right that we should continue doing, or maybe there's something not so right that we need to address and look at. So hopefully and prayerfully through our content through this season, you'll receive the conviction that will lead to conversion because you've had conversation. Okay. All right. So let's dive right on in. So I am so excited about this particular episode's content, because today we're going to be talking about the psychology of lust versus love. Okay. This one hits kind of different, as they say in urban pop culture, as I like to say. This one hits a little different because a lot of times in my practice over 25 years, a lot of people come to me concerning feelings and emotions regarding love and understanding of love. And when there's been a breakdown in love, there's a lot of love questions and a lot of love inquiries, self-love, and how do we love in a healthy way. So what we want to do is we want to address the psychology of lust versus love, because there is some strong differentiation between the two. And so what we're going to do is, because this is a very padded conversation. So what we're going to do is, in this episode, we're going to talk about the lust characteristics. And then in the next episode, we're going to talk about the love characteristics. And we're going to do a comparison and contrast, because what I want to make sure is that we have an understanding of what these dynamics are. So I don't want to rush it. I want to give it to you slow, and I want you to be able to absorb it and really be able to look at yourself. Now, one thing that I want to say as well, when I was reviewing the literature for this particular episode, and I was doing my research over just different case studies over the years, I thought about something that is written in Ecclesiastes rather 1:18. I want to recite that scripture to you, because you'll find yourself experiencing this as you go deeper and deeper this season in Sound Mind. And what Ecclesiastes 1:18 says is, "For with much wisdom is much sorrow. As knowledge increases, grief increases as well." And the reason why I wanted to bring that into our conversation today is that a lot of times in therapy, when I'm working with my patient population and when I'm doing the research, a lot of what I see sometimes literally it grieves me, but not from a place of sadness, but sometimes from a place of heaviness, because I'm able to see how wrong we've been doing things as a people, how wrong we've been doing things as human beings. Oftentimes, I'll share with my wife in my innermost conversations with her that because I believe in blending the sacred with the secular, because I believe in theology um, um, influencing psychology, a lot of times when I look at my cross references between what God words says with the clinical modalities and theories that I utilize, there's a heaviness that tends to happen, because I realize that we have been living wrong in so many ways in our personal relationships, our spiritual relationships, our marriages. Sometimes it just gets heavy on me, because I realized that we've just been doing it wrong, and we've been shorting ourselves out of the blessings of what relationships are supposed to be and the promises of God's blessings. And so I thought about that scripture and wanted to share that, because as you learn more and you begin to reflect in your own life, you're going to probably experience that heaviness as well. As you're going to look at yourself and say, possibly, I've been doing this wrong for a long time. But the reason why we're here is to have these conversations that again leads to conviction, which leads to conversion. So I just wanted to highlight that, because that way I don't want you thinking that, something's going on, something's wrong. No, that's an indication that everything is right, because with that increase in knowledge, we're going to be grieved in a good way, because it's going to make us want to move and do some things. Okay. So now that we got that out the way, now that I've done my disclosure, I want to hop right on into this psychology of lust versus love. And this is the lust edition. Okay. Before I start, I want to lay the backdrop as far as biblical references, because we always want to set the foundation from a biblical, and then we're going to tie together the clinical therapeutic aspect after we, of course, put everything in order. And what I want to reference is 1 John 2:16, okay? 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. And what that scripture says is, for everything, the lust of the eyes and the pride in one's possessions is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world, with this lust, is passing away, but the one who does the will of God remains forever. Okay? So the first thing that we want to establish is lust doesn't last. Let's just get that out there in the open. Lust does not last. Okay? So when we talk about lust, we want to talk about having an understanding of what lust really is, not from a definition perspective or just the common verbiage that we hear, but we want to get an understanding of the characteristics of lust. Okay, so we're going to talk about the characteristics of lust, but then we're going to look at some of the dynamics as well. Actually, let me reverse that. We're going to look at dynamics first, then characteristics in terms of what it looks like, because a lot of times we confuse lust with love and love with lust, because we don't really know the characteristics and dynamics because of how they may appear, and then also depending on where we may be in our own individual uh, spiritual walk or personal emotional growth path as well. So we're going to touch into that. So when we're talking about the dynamics of lust, what we want to look at is lust is wanting legitimate things in illegitimate ways. Okay? Let me say that again. Lust is wanting legitimate things in illegitimate ways. Okay? Another way that I like to often look at that and spin that is lust is wanting the right things the wrong way. That sometimes and oftentimes leads to our harm. Okay? Now, a biblical word that we've heard a lot of, but we probably never really coupled it with the concept of lust is coveting or covetousness. Okay, you hear that? That's one of the big 10, as I like to call them. We have the 10 commandments that God gave Moses for his people, and one of the 10 commandments God addresses not coveting what your neighbor has. Okay, so coveting is actually the biblical term for lust. Okay, so when we talk about coveting and lust is desiring and pursuing that which is not legitimate for you to have. Okay, so let's look at this from a application regard. So when we think about lust, let's say it's a legitimate need to want food. Okay, that's a legitimate need. We all got to eat. But lust is when we kind of go over into gluttony or overeating. Okay, so you want something that's a legitimate need, which is food, but then how you go about it and pursuing it, there being a harmful demonstration and impact on your behalf, is when it becomes lust. Okay, now I'm going to say this word, okay? And we're all adults here on Hope TV, because this is actually, when we think of lust, it does come up probably primarily from a physical regard. So let's have the sex reference, okay? Sex under God's order is not a bad thing, okay? That's a whole different episode. We'll touch that probably later on in season one, if not maybe I'm sorry. We'll touch that later in season 5, if not maybe even season 6, because that's a real deep one therapeutically. But sex is not a bad thing if it's up under God's ordinance in the manner in which He created it to be. But immorality, again, the illegitimate way of going about sex is when there's lusting and coveting that tends to happen, okay?
Hey, Dad. I need your help asking Jessica to prom.
Of course. Love is like the ocean. You have to tread the
Oh,
waters.
Dad. That's not the kind of help I needed. Hey, Jessica. Will you go to prom with me?
Yes.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care can't wait to share their first with you.
So again, we're talking about legitimate things that are understandable to have and that God wants us to have, but when we go about achieving it in illegitimate ways to the point that it can cause harm or disruption or even destruction, that's when it becomes a matter of lusting. Okay, so I wanted to kind of give us the backdrop in that because I wanted you to understand what we're talking about here. Because a lot of times when people hear the term lust, it's like, oh no, I'm not lusting. It's not in my spirit, because you think about it in an extreme way. But the whole concept of lust is based on, ironically, a need and actually a provision. But it's all about how we execute the provision that tends to differentiate how lust is either being rejected or even how it's being implemented or introduced into our lives, or how we may even implement it and introduce it in the lives of others. Okay, so that was important for us to understand those particular dynamics of lust. Okay, so what I did was I looked at the characteristics. I thought about, the sessions that I've had where I've dealt with individuals who may have had an eating disorder, individuals that may have had obsessive compulsive disorder, those that may have had generalized anxiety challenges, those that have had relationship issues as far as infidelity, those who have had issues with just a myriad of different dynamics where it appeared that lust was really the undergirding of what they were experiencing from a mental health regard. And so I was able to devise some characteristics, and I wanted to show you what it is that lust looks like and how it occurs. Okay, so we have seven characteristics of lust that we're going to talk about. And I want you to be able to, be honest and transparent with yourself. And I want you to ask, as I go over each characteristics, I want you to ask 2 questions. I want you to ask, when have I actually demonstrated that particular characteristic? Or when have I had that feeling that it was being done to me? So those are 2 questions that we want to ask with each characteristics, because we want to make certain that we're doing the work. Okay, like I always say to my population when they come to see me for therapy, your treatment is only as effective as your truth. Okay, if you're not honest and forthcoming with your treatment, I'm going to be pretty limited in what I can do in that aspect. So we want to be honest and transparent with our truth when it comes to this particular dynamic, because we really want to understand lust and the subtleties of it and how we can counter it, so that we can be able to recognize when it occurs, or even when we're demonstrating it to others, because we want to make room for love, because love is where it's at. That's what we want. Okay. All right. So the first characteristic of lust is being impulsive. Okay. When you think about lust and the dynamics that lust tends to manifest itself from a characteristic regard. Impulsiveness is a lot of the times what I've seen. Okay, think about when ladies, when you wanted that handbag, or you wanted them shoes, and you just had to have it. You just had to have it, and you didn't think about it. It was like, I want it, so you made an impulsive buy. Or sometimes, we hide it under the label of retail therapy. Now, as educated as I am, I've never seen a program for retail therapy, but I love the way that we put that twist on it. But let's be honest and transparent. And brothers, you don't get a free pass too. If you heard your favorite team was coming in town, or if there was those shoes or that suit you wanted and you just bought it with no regard, you was impulsive, then that's the characteristics of lust, is being impulsive. Now, if you want to apply that from a physicality regard, a lot of times when we look at lust and how it appears physically, oftentimes it's very impulsive, okay? Very impulsive. So impulsivity, being impulsive, is a characteristic of lust, okay? So ask ourselves the question, when have I actually acted in an impulsive way? Okay? And only you can answer that. But then also ask the question, when have I felt as if somebody was dealing with me impulsively? Okay? So that could be a reflection of some possible lust occurrences in our life as far as that's concerned. Okay? All right. The second characteristic is reckless. Okay? Lust has a reckless component to it. Because when lust shows up, a lot of times we throw all caution out the window. We don't think about long-term consequences. It's completely just reckless. Things that we probably wouldn't do if we took time to be rational and to think things out. Typically what would occur is we probably will make a much better decision, but because we're reckless, we're not thinking about the consequences. And we're not thinking about the impact that it's going to have, not just on us. Okay? So in recklessness is also a characteristic of lust. So ask yourself again the question, when have I actually been reckless? And be honest with yourself, okay? If that means going back to your younger years, going back, to some of your undergraduate years, your college years, your teenage years, just be honest with yourself, okay? So when was the time that you actually were reckless? But then also, when was there a time where you actually felt somebody was reckless with you? Okay, may have put you in a position where they put pressure on you to do something, and you felt as if, okay, there are consequences to this that could be long standing, and they were being reckless. Okay, so that's something to consider. That's definitely something we want to consider. All right. Third attribute of lust, selfishness. Being selfish or selfishness. Okay. A lot of times when you're talking about lust and we looked at being impulsive and being reckless, it's quite natural to see how selfishness will come into play. Because a lot of times with lust, we're just thinking about the right now. We're just thinking about us. We want it now, 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 now. We're not thinking about anybody else because we're lusting. We're lusting for whatever that thing is. So again, ask yourself the question, when have I actually, if I'm honest with myself, been selfish? And when have I also felt as if people were being selfish with me? Okay. Now, just as a point of insight, it doesn't just reflect on physicalities. These things can also be done emotionally. People can lust emotionally. People that are attention seeking, okay, that's a lust for attention. People that have a hard time listening to folk, that could be a lust for control. So it's just so many different ways that lust can manifest itself. It's not just physical. It can definitely be emotional, mental, and it can be spiritual. It can be spiritual. Okay, so I just want to put that out there because I don't want you to limit yourself in terms of your overall insight of the information, how we can apply this to move to higher ground and to having the sound mind that we are pursuing. Okay, now the fourth of lust is momentarily. Momentarily. Okay, a lot of times when you're talking about lust, it is right there in the moment. All it cares about is that moment, being momentarily focused. It doesn't think about the past. It doesn't think about the future. It's just in that moment. It's funny because we live in a culture where oftentimes you hear people say, you only live once. you're only gonna, you want to get one trip and, live life to its fullest. Well, I hear that and I can appreciate that in theory, but you make the wrong decision. And it doesn't feel like you just have one trip, on this life. You can feel as if you're living many punishments because of the decisions that we make because we're not exercising good judgment and we're operating from a spirit of lust. So lust has a momentarily focused agenda. It's not thinking about the past or the present. So again, let's ask ourselves the question: when have I actually operated in the moment without any regard to the past or the future? Or when have I felt like somebody dealt with me in the moment? Okay. And that can be applied in a lot of ways. One thing that comes to my mind is sometimes when you get a person that calls you for a sales call, and after you have kindly told them that you were interested, they just felt as if that moment, they just had to capitalize on that moment. And as a result, they would demonstrate some of these other characteristics, the impulsiveness and the selfishness of wanting to take that moment because they were lusting for that next sale or that next commission. Okay. So just again, be mindful of not just internal applications, but also external as well. Okay. All right. So the fifth characteristic, okay, lust is impossible to feel. And when I say feel, I mean FILL. Lust is impossible to feel. You never get enough. You never get enough. How many handbags, good sisters, does it really take? How many pairs of shoes? Okay. Brothers, how many Jordans do we really need to have? How many suits do we really need to have? When you out there, we just bought it. Well, it was on sale and I had to have them. And, it was on sale and, it was a limited edition. But you got 40 sitting at home. Like really, it's impossible to feel. So that's what we look at when we look at lust. It's never enough. It's never enough. And that's always a very, very careful place that we have to tread, because when something is never enough, that means we're always searching for something. Okay. So when you look at things from a lust regard, it's going to have that feeling of it's impossible to feel because there's a lack of something. And, we got to figure out what that is. And, of course, we could do that in therapy. If you see that, no matter how much you have, it's never enough. Maybe we don't have the emotional or spiritual maturity to be able to be thankful to the point where we say, okay, I got more than enough. I got more than enough. And I'm more than at peace with what I do have. So that's a characteristic as well. That's the fifth characteristic. And again, asking ourselves the question, when have I actually felt as if something was impossible to feel? So when did I feel like I just couldn't get enough of it? Doesn't mean, you maybe have something once or twice and that's just it. But when you start manifesting your life patterns to feel something at no regard for in no regard for the consequences or the impact, that means it's impossible for you to feel. So you may want to see either myself or one of my peers about that, because we want to see what's at the core of that impossibility to feel. Okay. But then also, when have I felt that it was impossible to feel whatever it was that those that I'm in relationship with may need? Sometimes we may feel as if it's impossible to please a parent. It's impossible to do enough for our spouse or our mate. And that's after we put forth good effort. So I don't want you all going to your parents or to your mate and saying, well, I heard on Sound Mind, the therapist said that you're impossible to feel. No, this is if you put forth the effort. Okay. So if you put forth the effort considerably and consistently, and it seems to not move the needle, then you probably need to come see myself or one of my peers, and let's have that conversation one-on-one therapeutically. Or maybe you need to bring your mate, your spouse, or your parents in. Okay. So nobody's above reproach when we look at any of these. So it's just a matter of all the different ways that we could apply it, because we definitely want to be convicted to have that conversion in our life. Okay.
What's up, y'all? It's your boy Jermaine Dolly, Mr. Hello Dolly himself. And guess what? You're tuned in to Tea and Worship with my homies, Minyan and Corey. Keep it out, y'all.
Hey y'all, it's Candy West, and you're watching Tea and Worship with Mignon and Corey.
It's your boy James Fortune, and you are watching my favorite news show, Tea and Worship, with my sis Mignon and Corey.
So the sixth characteristic is chaotic. Lust has a chaotic demographic to it, okay? When we say chaotic, it's confusing. It's never smooth. It's never fluid. It's always something. It's just never just right and smooth, okay? And a lot of times with lust, because it's chaotic, it's going to put us in a lot of anxiety provoking situations. It's going to also put us in some situations that can have some short term and long term consequences. Okay. From a spiritual regard, the Bible speaks of all things being decent and in order. Okay. And we also often refer to God as being God who is not the author of confusion. We know who the author of confusion and chaos is, and that's Satan and the enemy. So, when you look at it from a spiritual aspect, if you think about where lust has its origins from, who better to look at than Satan? Because Satan lusted for God's position. He demonstrated all these dynamics. He was impulsive, he was reckless, he was selfish, he dealt in the moment. And it was impossible for him to feel that, which is why he goes from place to place on earth looking to cause chaos because of the lust that he has. So I hope that that gave a personal application there where you can really see that lust has really been with us since the beginning of time. Okay, but we don't have to succumb to it at all. Okay, we don't have to succumb to it at all. Okay, because we are indeed called for victory and we operate not in victory. Okay, so the last one, the seventh characteristic of lust is just something to do. It's just something to do. It's not really a motivation behind it per se. It's just something to pass by time. And ironically, a lot of times when we demonstrate lust, you have that rush that you may feel in the lust being fulfilled. But the ironic thing about lust that I've always seen in my practice, regardless of the mental health and behavior health and relational dynamics, right after that lust has been fulfilled and satiated, it's always a letdown afterward. It's never what one thought it was going to be. So then when a lot of times therapeutically, when I would ask the question, well, what was on your mind? What were you thinking? What was the motivation? And they will often say to me, well, it was just something to do. So therefore, it was kind of it was a distraction. It was a distraction. Okay. So when it's just something to do, it doesn't really have a purpose outside of that immediate moment. That's often a characteristic that you'll see when it comes to lust and dealing with lust accordingly as far as that's concerned. So again, through all of these seven characteristics, we want to again ask the question, when have I actually, and whatever that characteristic is, and then also the second part of the question is, when have I felt that that was done to me? So the good thing in this is that I want us to be able to really look at lust in terms of what we have pushed on people, what we have taken people through, but then also what's been done to us. Because I want us to be able to look at our entire circle and our entire circumference and really get an understanding for lust and the psychology behind it so that we can be more active and intentional in having a life that's based on the principles of love and solid relationships and meaningful relationships that reciprocate good blessing into our lives, and then what we can do in the lives of others. Okay, so it's in summation. Here's basically what lust does. Lust basically says, "I just want a moment." That's what lust says. I just want a moment. This moment. That's it. So if lust had a voice, and you would ask lust, "Well, lust, what do you want?" Lust would say, "I just want a moment. I don't want you long term. I don't want to be invested. I don't want any responsibility, and I don't want any accountability. I simply just want a moment." Okay, so that's what lust would say. So, and this is something that I actually said to the husbands that I work with, but I took it and I expanded it outward so it could be applicable to everyone. And here's what I want us to understand as we wrap up the lust edition of the psychology of lust versus love is that the manner matters, reflects whether we are operating in lust or are we operating in love. And let me say that again. The manner in which we approach matters will reflect whether we are operating in lust or love. So if you want to know the manner in which you're addressing something or approaching something, look at those 7 characteristics. If you're approaching it out of impulsiveness, recklessness, selfishness, being momentarily focused, impossible to feel, chaotic, or it's just something to do, it's a pretty good chance, my brothers and sisters, that we're probably operating in lust if that is the manner in which we are approaching matters and dynamics. Okay, so just something for us to consider. Okay, I want to say in closing this: lust in and of itself cannot become love. It's just not how it works. Lust in and of itself cannot become love. Okay, so a lot of times people come to me for couples relational counseling, therapy, and marriages, and a lot of times I've seen where the relationship was based on lust, but because it wasn't overtly obvious, people wasn't able to really recognize that until we go through the premarital and the therapy, and then ultimately, by God's grace, we've been able to change the dynamics. But it wasn't until we were able to look at these dynamics and say, okay, this is what has fueled this particular relationship, but we can convert it through facing it and taking ownership of it. And I've seen some beautiful relationships become possible. Individuals who have gone on to become married and have very healthy marriages because they were able to take ownership of how it started. So how we start something does not necessarily have to be how it ends. Just depends on how we address the dynamics and how we take ownership of those dynamics. Okay, so there's hope. That's why we're here at Hope TV. There's hope, but you got to be willing to do the work. You absolutely have to be willing to do the work in order to get to where it is that you want to go in terms of moving from lust to love. Okay, so that's it for the lust edition. I hope it wasn't too heavy, but I believe all of us are grown and we're growing, and so we can handle these type of subject matters because that's why we're here. That's why we come to Sound Mind, is because we want to have conversion. Okay, so we got to do the heavy lifting. But the good thing about it is now that we have the information, as we always say here in Sound Mind, we don't just want the information. We want to take information and we want to have understanding. And then from understanding, we want to get wisdom. And how do we get wisdom? By applying the understanding from the knowledge and the information that we get. Okay? So again, knowledge is information. Understanding is, how does the information apply to you? How is it relevant to you? And then wisdom is, how do we execute the knowledge of the awareness of the information and how it applies to us. So that's it for episode 3. Next episode, we'll be doing the psychology of lust versus love, and we'll be functioning from the perspective of the love side of it. Okay, so don't think because it's love that it's going to be easy skating, because love comes with a whole different level of obligations and a whole different charge, because we look at it not from the world's concept, but really from God's perspective. And that is another one of those things that sometimes has grieved me spiritually, is because when I became aware with the biblical evidence of what God really calls love and what it calls us to do, it's heavy, because it lets me know that we've been loving wrong. We've been loving each other wrong. We've been loving our wives and husbands wrong. We've been loving our children wrong. We've just been loving wrong but there's a way that we can get right, and that's why we're here. So we're going to talk about that in the next episode. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I pray, as always, that the Lord bless you and keep you, that he make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you, that he return his loving smile and countenance towards you, that he will bless you when you're going out and coming in, and that he will give you shalom peace, that he will bless you to be at peace with him, also to be at peace with others, but equally as important, for you to be at peace with yourself. I'm Jay Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist. This has been another episode of Sound Mind. And remember, your theology guiding your psychology leads to sound doctrine, and sound doctrine leads to a sound mind. We'll see you next episode. We love you. Take care. God bless.